Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more. Whenever Sophie had some free time, she would put on one of her favorite outfits and chat online. While this might have been a routine for many, Sophie was unique. Her special outfits included a sleek flight attendant uniform, a charming French-made ensemble, and several gingham dresses styled similarly to the maid's uniform. Sophie had a secret that set her apart. She was a man who had enjoyed wearing women's clothing since trying on her first pair of panties 2 decades ago. Additionally, she had some particular preferences she indulged in before logging onto her favorite crossdressing website. Tonight, she chose a pink and white checked gingham dress with a very short skirt, paired with 2 starched white petticoats, a pink satin bra, matching panties, suspenders, white stockings, and 4-inch white pumps. She also selected white leather gloves that reached below the elbow and 3 scarves in pink, white, and yellow prints. Sophie carefully dressed in her lingerie and heels before focusing on her hair and makeup. Her hair was especially important to her, and she loved wrapping it in curlers covered with silk scarves. Before starting her hair, Sophie covered herself with a pink plastic shampoo cape. She wet her hair from a spray bottle on her vanity and began rolling it up. Over the years, she had become quite skilled at this process. As she worked, she hoped her online mistress, Sharon, would be available tonight. Sharon, who shared and indulged in Sophie's fantasies during their chats, was based in the United States, while Sophie was in the United Kingdom. The 5-hour time difference meant that as Sophie prepared for bed, Sharon was just starting her day. Nevertheless, Sophie hoped for the chance to chat with Mistress Sharon. Their chats had explored many of Sophie's fantasies, from using silk scarves to playing the role of a bondage bride or experiencing beauty salon punishment. Sophie had 2 main dreams: meeting her mistress in person and, more fantastically, being kidnapped by her mistress and made into a bondage dolly forever. As she finished curling her hair, Sophie sighed, imagining the possibilities if these dreams came true. She reached for the pink hairnet she always kept nearby and secured it over her curlers. Sophie quickly removed the shampoo cape, slipped into her heels, and put on her petticoats. She then dressed in the gingham dress, admiring how well it fit as she zipped it up. She loved how the short dress revealed her petticoats and the tops of her suspenders and stockings. She particularly enjoyed how her stocking-clad legs looked in high heels. Sophie carefully slid her gloves on and smoothed them out. Finally, she placed one of her silk scarves over her curlers and hairnet, tying it neatly under her chin, then added a second scarf on top. Pleased with her reflection, she did a little curtsy, imagining how delightful it would be if Mistress Sharon could see her now and how hard it would be to resist taking this sweet Sissy as her lovely bondage scarf dolly. Sophie settled gracefully in front of her computer and quickly logged into her favorite chat room. Scanning the list of online users, her eyes lit up when she saw a familiar name. Mistress Sharon was online tonight. Excitedly, Sophie sent a private message to her mistress, greeting her warmly. Sharon was delighted to see Sophie and complimented her on her attire, noting how feminine she looked. Sophie blushed at the praise, prompting Sharon to remark that it was nice to see young women blush. Sophie wasn't sure how Mistress knew she was blushing but assumed she did. Sharon mentioned she had put on white satin elbow-length gloves and tied 2 scarves, one in a green and black geometric print, and the other a solid black over her hair. Sophie always felt thrilled when Mistress wore a special scarf for her. After a few minutes of pleasant conversation, Sharon took control of the interaction. She first inquired if Sophie had left her male parts unrestrained, as Sharon preferred. Sophie confirmed she hadn't tied them up. Next, Sharon asked if Sophie had any wrist restraints. Sophie admitted she did, and that one pair was padded. Sharon instructed her to fetch the padded restraints and the keys quickly. Sophie's heart raced with excitement as she hurried to comply. She placed the restraints and keys beside the computer and resumed her seat. Sharon then instructed her to put on the restraints with her wrists in front. Sophie obeyed without hesitation. Next, She was to hold the keys in her hand and place her hands in front of the computer screen for Mistress to check her restraints. Though the request seemed unusual, Sophie assumed it was part of the role-play. Sharon's next command was to place the keys beside the keyboard, which Sophie did. Reading Sharon's next comment made Sophie uneasy. Sharon praised the decor of Sophie's room, noting how it reflected her femininity and how helpless she looked in her padded restraints. Sophie typed back, "Mistress, how can you see my room? You're not here, are you?" Sharon replied with a smiley face emoticon. Sophie glanced around her room, searching for any sign of how Mistress could see inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, Sophie responded that Mistress had a flair for the dramatic in their role plays. Sharon asked if Sophie doubted her. Sophie quickly reassured her that she didn't doubt Mistress at all, though typing was cumbersome with her hands restrained. Sharon then typed that Sophie was about to experience her deepest fantasy, one she had often shared in their chats. Sophie felt a thrill of anticipation but wondered how Mistress would make it happen. The final message on Sophie's screen read, "Be careful what you wish for." The room plunged into darkness as the lights and computer screen went out. The only illumination came from the streetlight outside, casting eerie shadows and strange shapes on the walls. Sophie's fear surged, and she attempted to call out, but her voice faltered as she saw a shadowy figure approaching. Through the dim light, she could make out a headscarf on the figure, but little else was visible. A voice whispered close to Sophie's ear, "Sophie, it's me, Sharon. Tonight, I'm going to bring your fantasy to life. Open your mouth so I can gag you with the knotted double scarf we've used in our role play. Both are white silk and perfect for you." Two hands pressed against her scarf-covered head. Sophie replied softly, "They are open, Mistress. Gag me and use me as you wish." The knot was quickly pushed into her mouth, and the scarves were tied behind her head. "Your lipstick will look so nice on your gag, dear," Sharon said. Another silk scarf was tied over Sophie's head, neatly secured under her chin. Sharon murmured that this would keep the gag in place better. Sophie felt a mix of excitement and fear, surprised that her fantasy was becoming reality. Sharon instructed, "Bring the chair in. The victim is ready." Sophie wondered who Sharon was talking to and what kind of chair she meant. Sharon leaned close and mentioned it was fortunate Sophie was on the first floor. It would simplify removing her from the building. Moments later, Sophie heard the rolling of a chair and saw two figures in the dim light. One was much taller, dressed in a tight dark green satin dress, white elbow-length gloves, and two scarves over her hair. Her face was strikingly beautiful. Was this Sharon? The other figure, about Sophie's height, was dressed as a French maid, with at least one scarf over her head. Even in heels, she was shorter than the tall woman. "Now Sophie, we'll dress you in salon gowns, plastic shampoo capes, and a couple of raincoats, then secure you in this oversized salon chair. While I secure you, Giselle will pack your feminine clothing for the trip. Do you have a passport? It doesn't matter, no one will know you've left the UK or entered the US. There, you'll be the bound, sissy curler and scarf slut of your dreams." As Sharon whispered, Giselle packed Sophie's apparel, including gingham dresses, a flight attendant uniform, maid uniforms, lingerie, heels, scarves, and gloves into large cases. Sharon commented on the lovely taste reflected in Sophie's maid uniforms and reminded Giselle to pack all of Sophie's curlers, shower caps, and hair dryers. Sharon's ominous laugh sent a shiver through Sophie. Despite her unease, Sophie trusted Mistress Sharon, feeling her fate was in good hands. Sharon had Sophie stand so she could be properly dressed in salon gowns and capes. As the first pink satin gown was draped over Sophie, Sharon explained that all three gowns were pink satin, tied in the back, and would cover her from neck to ankles. Sharon swiftly tied the back of the first gown and arranged the other two before Sophie even realized it. Once Sophie was seated again, Sharon added two pink plastic shampoo capes, positioning the first with its long part hanging down her back and the second covering her completely. Sharon then whispered that she had a retro pink cape that tied in the front, which would be the perfect finishing touch for Sophie. Finally, 2 pink plastic raincoats were placed over her, and their hoods were pulled up over her scarf-covered head. Gazelle softly announced, "Mistress, our guest is all packed and ready to go." Sophie watched as Gazelle executed a perfect curtsy to her mistress. Sophie was then helped to her feet and guided to the oversized salon chair. After seating her, Sophie felt Mistress Sharon lift the coverings so Gazelle could unlock the wrist restraints and resecure her arms to the chair. Her first arm was secured to the chair with 3 scarves, and her other arm was quickly bound in the same manner. Gazelle knelt and spread Sophie's legs to secure her ankles, whispering, "Oh, mistress, I can't wait to have her on the plane under her hairdryer, kneeling at her feet and burying my head under all these lovely capes and gowns." Sharon smiled, knowing this was a surprise for Sophie. She had Gazelle fasten 3 leather straps around Sophie's waist and chest to secure her to the chair. Leaning forward, Sharon asked if Sophie was ready to continue her fantasy. Though Sophie couldn't speak, her eyes showed joy, happiness, desire, and peace. She nodded slowly, clearly communicating her approval and eagerness. Gazelle made 2 trips to load Sophie's wardrobe into cases. While this happened, Sharon remained silent, allowing Sophie to process everything. When Gazelle returned and confirmed the cases were packed, Sophie knew departure was imminent. She had no idea how long she would be gone or if she would ever return to her homeland, but that was inconsequential now that she was under her mistress's control. Gazelle and Sharon carefully wheeled the salon chair to a waiting van. Using a built-in ramp, they loaded the chair and Sophie into the van. Once secured, Gazelle ensured the tie-downs were tight. Sophie glanced around the van's interior. The middle seat had been removed to fit her chair, and the tinted windows prevented anyone from seeing her. Gazelle placed earphones over Sophie's head and gently caressed her through the scarves. Until Sharon activated the earphones, Sophie could hear nothing. Gazelle then put a large pink flowered plastic dryer bonnet over her head and attempted to kiss her through the gag. After ensuring Sophie wouldn't move around too much, Gazelle closed the side door and took her place in the front passenger seat. Sophie watched as Mistress Sharon took the driver's seat. Before starting the engine, Sharon activated the earphones so Sophie could hear their conversation. As they drove toward the airport, Sharon praised Gazelle's efforts, assuring her that she had earned her mistress's favor. Sharon then turned her attention to Sophie, asking if she remembered their bound bride role play. Sophie eagerly nodded. Sharon's smile widened as she saw Sophie's reflection in the mirror. She explained that their fantasy would become a reality once they arrived in the States. The gown and special veil were already ordered, and the bondage bridal bouquet would be ready whenever Sharon decided. Additionally, Sophie's wedding negligee was in her new closet, along with the ropes for securing her to the marriage bed and the paddles for her spankings. Sophie absorbed this eagerly. Though unable to express her pleasure verbally, she tried to convey her joy through her eyes. She was thrilled that her mistress had taken the time and effort to make her fantasy come true, and having Gazelle, a sissy who seemed to share some of her desires, was more than she had hoped for. Arriving at the airport, Sharon used a side gate reserved for corporate jets and turned off Sophie's earphones while calling ahead to ensure the plane's crew was ready. Sophie watched as Sharon drove up to a hangar, honked the horn, and entered. Gazelle and the pilot helped move Sophie from the van to the plane. The earphones and restraints were removed. Sophie noticed the pilot, who wore a feminine figure under her uniform, addressing Sharon as mistress, making Sophie wonder if there was another playmate on the plane. The chair was rolled into the plane, where Sharon awaited them. Inside the plane, a section was designed like a beauty salon, complete with mirrors and 3 styling stations with overhead dryer hoods. 2 stations had styling chairs securely in place. The pilot and Gazelle positioned Sophie's salon chair in front of the 3rd station, which lacked a chair. The pilot curtsied to Sharon, then went to prepare the plane for departure. Gazelle, smiling at Sophie, asked if she could get ready for the trip. She briefly disappeared into the back of the plane and returned with salon gowns, plastic shampoo capes, raincoats, and beautiful silk scarves. Sharon assisted Gazelle into the salon gowns, carefully tying the backs. She then ensured Gazelle was fully covered with the shampoo capes. Sophie watched with interest. As Gazelle donned her raincoats, Sophie took a moment to admire her mistress. Sharon was strikingly tall, especially in her 4-inch heels, and her black silk scarf partially concealed a green geometric print. Despite Sharon's concerns about her figure, Sophie found her mistress incredibly shapely and desirable. Sharon picked up a water spray bottle and drenched Sophie's headscarves and the curlers underneath. She smiled and mentioned she would repeat this several times during the flight, so Sophie would spend most of the trip under the dryer hood. Gazelle, now with a fresh coat of red lipstick, sat at Sophie's feet and asked, "May I assume my position, mistress?" Sharon nodded, observing as Gazelle positioned herself under Sophie's coverings. Sophie squirmed slightly as her panties were removed. As Sharon lowered the dryer hood, she looked at Sophie and said, "Gazelle will remain in that position throughout the flight. Enjoy yourself." With that, Sharon lowered the hood, turned on the dryer, and watched as Sophie began to experience unparalleled pleasure. For Sophie, this marked the beginning of a dream come true, one from which she hoped she would never awaken.